Hello, and welcome to Transmission X. I'm your host, Nate Allen. Today's date, January 12th, 2024. Today's transmission is a special one, as I sit down and become a guest instead of the host on the podcast The Fact Hunter, hosted by George Hobbs. If you've never listened to the Fact Hunter podcast, it has been one of my favorite podcasts, one of my go-tos for the past 4 years. George was gracious enough to allow me to come on to the Fact Hunter podcast and have one of the best conversations I've had in a while. It is not often you get to talk to a like-minded person about the subjects that we talk about. We both want everyone to do their own research. We both don't claim to know everything. We both seek the truth, and that trail of truth will pick up in the next transmission, where I continue the journey of seeking out the deception. But today, if you'd just like to sit down and enjoy the conversation between two like-minded truthers, well, give it a listen.
You can email us at thefacthunter.com. Or if you're old school like to myself and you like to send letters, our snail mail address is both at the bottom of the website and in every show description. So, send us a letter and say hello. Without any further ado, we're going to get right into it today. We have a very special guest. His name is Nate, and he is joining us. He is the host of the new podcast, the Transmission X podcast. And if you'd like to reach out to Nate, his email is transmissionx@mail.com. And listen, don't worry about trying to copy it down. All Nate's information, including the link to his podcast and his email, will be in the show notes. So please do, send Nate a note and say hello. Say that 5 times fast without any further ado. Let's bring on Nate. Good morning, Nate. How are you doing today?
Good morning, George. I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. And beautiful day here. This is kind of the calm before the storm where we're at. We're expecting some pretty frigid temperatures this weekend. And the controllers have been toying with us lately. We've had some outlandish weather. I don't know if you saw that storm that basically went from Florida to Maine. It was one of the biggest storm lines that I've ever seen, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right?
I like how you said the controllers. Project Cirrus still at work, apparently.
Oh, 100%.
Since 1947 till today.
100%. Well, please do take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience.
My name is Nate Allen. I don't have much to convey today other than that I'm an independent researcher, just on a journey for the truth. Starting a conversation, which is the reason why I started Transmission X, inspired by the likes of, like George said earlier, we spoke earlier, Art Bell, Bill Cooper. I really just have a message, and the message is just to never think that you know everything. People know very little. There are truth tellers. Bill Cooper, I think, was one. He was offered insider information, truly. I think that he was, and that's why he was able to deliver that message. But when you listen to Transmission X, I don't want any one of my listeners to ever think that I am telling them the truth. I want you to always question, and just like I do, every bit of information that you hear. And like I said, it's just going to be a trail that I go down, and usually the trail starts with a lie that I figure out. Very good lie detector, and we try to find bits and pieces of the truth and information along the way. And I just hope it's as interesting to you as it is to me.
Really well stated, and that's one thing I say all the time. I'm giving you my opinion on things, and I always encourage people to research for yourself. And one other thing you touched on that is kind of near and dear to my heart in the truth community. There's a difference between opinion and fact. And just because, me and one of my listeners' opinions vary, it doesn't mean I'm wrong or they're wrong, right? If I say the capital of Delaware is Wilmington, I'm wrong because it's Dover. However, if I say I believe that drone-like aerial vehicles struck the Twin Towers, but you think there were no planes. That doesn't mean I'm wrong or you're wrong. We just have different opinions. And I think you really said something that's never assume that you know everything, and you're not going to learn. You're not going to grow as a truther or a person unless you keep an open mind and actually listen to people and give them a chance to speak. I've seen so many debates, and debates, sometimes they're okay, but for the most part, the people going into the debates already have their mind made up, and they're not going to change their opinion in a debate, mostly because of people's prides. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that that is one of the problems with a lot of people out there, is that they get preachy. I think that they get so emotionally attached to the opinion they have that their mind shuts down and they're unable to accept any other opinion, which, as you stated, it makes it they're unable to learn any further. And if anything, I'm a voracious learner first. And so if my opinion ever comes up incorrect, I'll be the first to admit that. And it's tough for me to listen to a lot of what I listen to, because the material is very controversial for the most part, which is why most of the stuff I cover, they call conspiracy theory. It's controversial to the mainstream, and the mainstream has been so programmed. They've been programming people for so long that people are used to that narrative. But when it comes to something new, they completely shut down. That the cognitive dissonance is real.
100%. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your journey to the truth? Were you one of the, folks, like, growing up, everything kind of seemed not as it was, or were there certain events in your life that kind of led you to search for things that go against the official narrative?
So the very first time, I was 5 years old, and I think I was born this way. I went to a Catholic school, and I remember that it's funny that you brought that up. I hadn't thought about this memory in a long time. I remember the priest explaining how Jesus was God. And I think I raised my hand and I asked, well, then who did he pray to? And it was just, I never took anything as it was given to me. I always, if something didn't seem right in the story that I was being told, I always questioned it. I think from there, it was another hard-hitting, weird question. In seventh grade, we were learning about World War II. And I think I was the only kid that was like, well, why did the Germans act that way? And then the teacher's explanation was purely propaganda. And I was like, well, not all those people. They had to be mad at something. What started it? And the teacher couldn't answer the question. And it's just been like that my whole life. I hear something that doesn't quite make sense, and I realize that there's another side of the story. Like Paul Harvey, and here's the other.
Here's the rest of the story. Yeah. That's really awesome. And I kind of had a lot of questions growing up as well. I wasn't as vocal, right? I didn't really have the courage at a young age to kind of question the teachers. I did on a few occasions. But for the most part, you get that's just the way it is kind of answer. And anytime you get that, whether you're a freshman in high school or you're 55 years old, that should be a sign that there's more to the story. And I can assure you, especially if you use better search engines like Brave or Yandex, you're going to find a lot of people who have written some pretty great stories on alternative history. And it's not just World War II. It's almost every major event over the last 500 years, literally going back to the Reformation, because the matrix that has been built, they control the media, they control Hollywood and everything else. So it's very important, every story that comes out, to be closely examined and look for what end state does this story have. For instance, going back to March 22nd, of 2021, the King Soup shooting. The day before, the headline of the Denver Post was "Gun Bill Dies in House." And the next day you had the King Soup's air quote shooting. And the following day, the bill gets, it goes through without any hesitation. So anytime there's this large scale event, there is normally always, and listen, there every now and then there isn't something organic, but many of the things that you see on the news are.
Well, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, but you just made me think of the like how many people actually read the Patriot Act?
Less than
honestly,
half of 1%.
I think it was less than 5. Literally, I remember watching this massive piece of legislation. I used to be one of those guys that watched C-SPAN, and I was always in what was going on the House floor and stuff like that. But I remember that it was 5 people, less than 5 people, and I don't even think they were raising their hand confidently. So you're exactly right. Major events happens. All of a sudden, the legislation, which was like 1,100 pages or some crazy numbers, right there, ready, and the vote was passed in like less than 5 minutes or something like that. It was that was another sign for me, like, whoa, okay, let me look into this, and so then I had to go try to find all the pages and look it up myself, and yeah, I've always questioned because nothing's ever seemed right. It's always seemed too changed.
Right. And without a doubt, if you look at this and you see how long of a text it is, you know that this was written well before 9/11, and they already had these organizations in place ready to go, like FEMA and or not FEMA, I'm sorry, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and all the tentacles that came from that. The federal government grew by like another 100,000 employees, which, man, if you have you looked at our debt clock lately? We just blew by 33 trillion, and we're well into 34 trillion already. Yeah. It's disgusting.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, I listened to your podcast. They're really well done, and like we had mentioned off air before you came on, it really has the Art Bell flavor to it. You're very your cadence and the way you deliver your message is really well done. Were you one of the folks that at night when you were laying in bed, were you listening to Art Bell?
Oh yeah, all the old radio, Art Bell. Used to go to the school in the mornings. Paul Harvey would be on there, and those were some of my main too. Because Art Bell was late at night, and you weren't supposed to listen to that, and it was hard to get to sometimes, and sometimes I wasn't up for it. But I would always try to see if I could catch reruns of whatever Art Bell said. I thought was just great, and I thought his interviews were just amazing, and all of his stuff is still available in the Internet Archive.
Yep.
You can go back and listen to all of that stuff. It's available for everyone. And if anyone's listening and never really given the Art Bell show, like given it a listen, I absolutely recommend it. It's radio gold, ladies and gentlemen, absolute radio gold.
I think 2 of his best episodes that at least I recall was Art Bell with John Lear and the infamous Officer X, that guy who called in and then he kind of disappeared. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, wait. Did he called in and then what did he talk about? Because he called in like for about 5 years, right? And then it was like some ongoing story.
One of them was that I think it was
what was this about? Do you have it?
I think that was the one where the USS Ulysses S. Grant almost launched its nuclear payload after some type of communications blackout.
Oh man, you know what? You're gonna make me go back and listen to this. Officer X. You're right. He was on the nuclear submarine.
Yeah.
Oh man, I hadn't thought about that in so long.
Yeah,
that is such a blast from the past right there.
And what's crazy to think that was like 25 years ago. And some of these episodes seem like just recently. That was like 97 or 98. And the John Lear one is very interesting as well. What particular subjects? I know you're like myself; you have interests all over. But let's talk about, say, your top 3, and air quotes here, conspiracy theories that you're going to be, peeking into. And what are your thoughts on them? Let's start with. You can pick any one of the 3, and we'll talk about them.
Okay, so I started my podcast off with the Mandela effect. So that's one, because I think that it has a deeper meaning than most people are giving it. I think people are just pushing it aside and thinking it's fun and games, because when you start to really go back and read and research ancient civilizations, that's another one that's big with me, because a lot of what happened back then is happening now. And back then, their focus wasn't so much physical as it was esoteric, occult, spiritual based. And it wasn't because I don't think that they were ignorant. I think it was the opposite. I think our society has become very physical. Only things that exist are what you can sense with your 5 senses. And I think that is a very narrow approach to what is really out there. I mean, what you're finding now in sciences all over the world, that they're learning more about electromagnetism. They're learning how that can affect energy. All they have to do is go back and look at Tesla, and you'll realize that his inventions and his work was squandered, as he was put away by a big bankster, and his work was stolen. And I just find that I go back to ancient civilizations because they looked a lot at numbers and frequency and the meanings that those had when it came to reality. And I just find that stuff very interesting. There's a podcast that I don't agree with everything this podcaster states, but it's about the secret teachings. That's the name of the podcast. And I think it's a gem. Like I said, I don't agree with everything, but it is a mind opener, and it gives you a different perspective. So Mandela effect, one. Most conspiracy theories, we're on like an undefeated streak here. So if you've been called as conspiracy theorist, you're in good company, because the majority of conspiracy theories are just being proved right. And so, all right, my big Mandela effect, I thought, was a good way to start off my particular podcast. I think I'm going to go into the political arena a little bit, but what I found is I'm going to stick with the perpetrators of the crimes. Like, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you kind of have to like whodunits. You kind of have to like mysteries, like Clue, because literally you're on the path, and you're able to pinpoint who's lying to you and who's lied to the people. And a lot of the times, that's what you can pinpoint to know that it's not real, like NASA. We can all pinpoint that NASA is lying. When any video that you watch, you can see that the bubbles are up. You can see the cords holding them down. You know they're lying. You just don't know why. The why is really difficult to find out. That's why I call myself a lie detector, and different truth tellers are out there. Like, we truthers look for those truth tellers, and I'm right there with you. I'm just an average Joe, but you got to find the lies along the way. When the truth teller comes, then whatever he says, you can back that up by the lies that you found, and then all of a sudden the truth begins to reveal itself. So that's going to be my approach. My podcast is going to be very, very much conspiratorial based, but I won't dismiss if supernatural news happens as well. But like, and I think Transmission X is going to have Transmission X breaking transmissions. Like the other day, I'm going to have to cover this. I didn't because I haven't done anything like it yet. But in the future, if there are Hasidic Jews coming up from under the ground from a tunnel,
Right.
you can absolutely expect a transmission from me because that's interesting and that is a clue that's going to lead to a greater truth later. I have a feeling. Because in the past, if you know anything about their history, they used to climb out of these tunnels called slicks, and they would store weapons and caches of food, and they did this right underneath the nose of their quote unquote oppressor, and found that very interesting. As soon as my buddy broke the story to me, and I was immediately fascinated, and that's something that's those live events are gonna be on Transmission X as well as ancient history and conspiracy theories too.
Well done. And if you could take a few minutes, because I know last week we spoke about this a little bit, and actually you're the second person in the last 3 months to be on the podcast and talk about the Mandela effect. But you did mention that there was some words changed in the Bible, but I think it was from the Geneva to the King James, correct?
So that's very interesting research. Researchers have been finding that some things you can find in all versions, but that the King James version is the one changing the most. And that's what I found interesting and referenced in my podcast. Oh, sorry, is the audio going in and out? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Oh, okay, sorry, I think I was hearing like an echo or something. But that is what I found really interesting. I mean, off the top of my head, let me see if I can remember.
I know you had
I
mentioned the
think it
letter
was
K
the
being
one that
really
the one that really stuck out to me, right? The one that really stuck out to me was Luke 19:27. So for anybody who's listening, happens to go to Gateway or have a Bible out, just look up Luke 19:27. Um, you know, it's one thing to do different translations of the Bible, and then say, oh, well, it was just this translation. But if you read this passage in many of the versions, it's just like something Jesus never would have said. And I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe what stuck out to me is he's paraphrasing. He basically asked non-believers to be killed in front of him. Now, if this is new to any of you listeners, it's crazy. It's going to sound crazy. But just look it up and listen to my second episode as well. I'll go into more examples, but it gets really creepy when you realize that the word has been altered and altered supernaturally. Because I encourage all of you to go back and research these changes that are happening in the Bible. It's interesting, it's creepy, and if you grew up on the Bible like I did, it's going to knock your socks off. It's going to be something that you just couldn't believe is true. But when why they call it, you'll look up this topic and you'll find it's going to be called supernatural Bible changes or the Bible Mandela effect. There's many people who have chimed in on this subject, and it's for good reason. There's pastors all across the United States chiming in on this subject, and I just found it very interesting.
I have it in front of me. I'll read it. It says, "But those mine enemies, which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me."
Right? Like, is that the Jesus that any of us ever learned about?
That's really interesting.
I mean, it's just wild to me. And when you start looking into it like I did, I feel like most people will come to some conclusion, and it'll be an effect. The Mandela effect, I try to get across in my podcast, is an actual effect. It causes confusion and chaos, and it made me think of, if you ever read The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, he explains in there that from Babylon moving forward, in ancient Egypt specifically, that there was a priest caste, a sacerdotal caste. They usurped the position formerly occupied by initiates into these mysteries, and they seized the reins of, he calls it spiritual government, and he was referencing ancient Egypt. And I think he goes on to say that it's because of black magic, and that dictated a state religion back then, and it paralyzed intellectual, spiritual activities, and basically this priest class took control of the politics of ancient Egypt, and it was well known back then. He called it the Scarlet Council, and it's just interesting. I tried to look up the Scarlet Council. You can't find it I couldn't find it in any other writings anywhere else. But man, if the Scarlet Council doesn't make you think of the cardinals in our current day Catholic Church, then I don't know what to tell you. That's what it made me think of, because they seem to deal the same way, and they seem to have a lot of power. And they seem to. The more you look into Jesuits, the more interesting that it gets. That it could be that ever since ancient Egypt, the Scarlet Council has continued to rule and be subversive in the background. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that goes all the way back to, the story goes that the Scarlet Council, who, again, like you said, is this committee of dark priests, they actually took power and controlled the pharaoh, which, I mean, he was just like many of our politicians. He was a puppet.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't mean to get off subject, because this might be, I don't know if you covered this but it makes me think of the cardinals in modern day. It makes me think of the Jesuits, and I recently was reading about the Jesuits and how sneaky and how underhanded in history they've actually been. I found a story that is gonna shock people. I'm gonna definitely put it on a podcast, but I might just release the gem right now with you. There's a story throughout history that hasn't been told, that the Jesuits sort of created Zionism, and it seems like that may be at odds. For those of you who don't know what the Jesuits are, the Society of Jesus. It's been around for a long time, and that sounds really nice, and their oaths sound really nice. But when you look into these guys, it couldn't be further from the truth. And Zionists, they aren't just the people who think that Israel should be a state and who argue that Zionism has been around well before Israel was actually the nation state that it is today. This is when I say Zionist, I'm talking about those extremists who believe that you are goyim, that you're cattle. They live by the Talmud, and they believe in a Jewish power structure, and a Jewish power structure alone.
Yeah, 100%. And you're not off topic at all. We just had our last guest Tuesday night was William Boot, and he's dedicated his life to exposing the Jesuits and the Society of Jesus and the Black Pope. And, them, like you say, there is a power structure amongst the Freemasons, the Skull and Bones. And he says the exact same thing, that the Jesuits are the ones responsible for, creating Zionism. And even one of the great men. Really? I'm sorry?
Does he really? I mean, I got to listen to this guy. That's so. It's the first time I'd ever read it, and I might be new to all this stuff, but I'm gonna have to look him up. You said his name is William Booth?
Yeah, it was our last episode that we just did Tuesday night. You'll see it in the it's the latest podcast that we have out, and one of the great Americans of the early to mid 19th century, Samuel Morse, inventor of the Morse code, and one of the great painters of our time. Back in, I think, 1835, he warned Americans of this, the Jesuit attempt to control the governments of the world. And you're talking almost 200 years now. And again, much of one of the biggest world events was the Reformation. Martin Luther breaking away, and even William. He mentioned the other day that he thinks that. Like Martin Luther was this kind of controlled opposition, which they always say if they need a hero, we will provide them one. But I'm not really sure. I mean, because he really called him out with the 95 Theses, and once the printing machine evolved, people were able to better communicate, better organize, and certainly, the Geneva Bible, if I remember correctly, that is actually a product of the Reformation. And then, 50 years later, King James. And by the way, Francis Bacon was pretty tight with King James. And if you look at what Francis Bacon was involved in, I tend to think that's one of the reasons that some of the books of the Bible was left out. But that is an entire different subject. But yeah, have you ever read? Have you ever read the Jesuit Oath?
Oh, listen. Yeah, it's supposed to be okay. So there's two, right, that I've read. One is very menacing. People say, "Well, this isn't a real document." There's another that you can look up, and it will say they have to be dedicated, pious. They have a vow of poverty. Listen, what is the Black Pope? Arturo
Sosa.
What is his name?
Sosa.
That's right. Yeah, look up his net worth. He's worth it, and it's only on paper. And I'm sure you could probably do a 1099 or a 990 paper trail on this guy a mile long. But he's worth $1 to $7 million, and his connections are just absolutely mind bending. His power that he wields, and there's a supposedly a gray pope too, and that's Pepe Orsini, and the Orsini family is one of those families. It's one of those hidden families that seems to just be going throughout history. I mean, there's many of these families that I'll definitely be getting into on Transmission X, because we have to shed light on these people. Pepe Orsini, he's connected with none other than the Rothschilds. So it's this when you start looking into this web that they built, it's crazy. And the story that you wouldn't think that extremes like Jesuits and Zionists, you wouldn't think that they could work together. But it's almost like the Jesuits can play Muslims, because did he tell you the story about Muhammad having a Catholic uncle and being groomed by the Catholic uncle for his belief structure and his belief systems that he later preached?
Not sure I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, so Muhammad was tutored by his uncle. He was a strict Roman Catholic, and his wife too. And the story is that back during, this is before the Crusades, the Vatican didn't want a standing army of its own, or at least optically. So they were doing what they do today. They were causing division between ancient Palestinians. They're causing division between the Muslims when they were teaching Muhammad and the Jews. And so once they got them to start fighting, well, then guess who they had on deck to guard the Holy Road? The Knights Templar. And then they had the Knights Templar guarding the passages to the Holy Land, and they're literally bringing up in literature all of this talk about Israel, ancient state of Israel, and it's so people are obviously they have to get there, so they have them guarding the Holy Road, and then they get the Pope from France when the gig is up. They get the Pope from France. I think it's Pope Philip. They get him to take out the Knights Templar, and the Catholic Church seizes all of that wealth, all of that banking wealth the Knights Templar had. And then by the time they had everyone up in arms, well, then during this time, actually, it's the Crusades. You got them to fight each other, and then that leads all the way up to the creation of the modern day Israel that we have today. That leads all the way to the Rothschilds and the Balfour Declaration. I mean, it's the craziest story. I think it's one of the craziest stories and one of the most interesting stories that I've read. Just reading history, just going back and reading, trying to connect dots.
I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of people have different opinions on what the 322 means with the skull and bones. If you type in, for folks new to the podcast, if you type in skull and bones, into your search engine, you'll see a skull with bones and a 322. That's the society that Prescott Bush, Poppy Bush, and W. Bush, John Kerry, and some of the biggest names in politics over the last 100 years almost now have been a part of. But the Knights Templar, according to the history books, they ceased operations on March 22nd, 1312. So that very much could be who's behind the skull and bones. They're the ones who, like you said, kind of conquered the Knights Templars and took their money.
Super interesting. Jacques Molay and all those guys. Once you start learning, you're like, okay, this is it's crazy if the Jesuits pulled this off. And so that's what like I said, I'm not going to come on any show or go on mine and preach that this is the absolute truth. It is a story I learned in history. There's a lot of stories. It's just a very interesting one. And when you start following these families, because I found that a lot of these lead back to families. And, people talk about 13 families, and it does lead back to them. I mean, you have DC, you have the Corporation of London that now goes by the Meyer Corporation, I think is what it's called. And then you have that connected directly to the Vatican. And it's a financial power structure, the likes of which the world, I don't think, has ever seen before. It's extremely interesting. They're all connected. By the way, all of those three cities are all city-states. They don't pay any taxes. They have their own flags. They're in their existing countries, but completely separate from them. They have their own laws. If you really want to look into this, ladies and gentlemen, it blew my mind. And this may all be common knowledge to a lot of you, but I just find it extremely, extremely interesting. Each one of these cities has an obelisk to mark it.
Yep.
That's just Cult of Osiris right there. It's just extremely, extremely interesting. I can't wait to get into that in my podcast. I can't wait to start this conversation.
And of course, how tall is the Washington Monument?
Oh, I don't know. It's got to be something 666, right?
It's 555 feet, and if you multiply that times 12, you get your 666, right? 12 inches.
Oh, for goodness sake!
And it's 55 feet wide at the base, so you get another 666. So, and of course, if you look at the aerial shot of Washington D.C., it looks like an owl, which is a tip of the cap to Moloch.
Unbelievable!
Yeah,
it's wild. And you know what? I think you looked him up the last time we spoke off air, but I found that interesting. You'll find that in my episodes too. So that the letter K just happens to be showing up in the Bible, and the letter K significant to the Ka, significant to magic with a K. I just found the connection very interesting because it all goes back to an ancient Egyptian magic called Heka. And it was the actual power behind the word. And once I realized that connection, I was like, this is getting way too out there for me, but it was also interesting at the same time.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I know we mentioned that before. One thing I forgot to mention about the families is the other family that's kind of low profile that doesn't get talked about is the Pizer family. Or Pazer family, however you say. And it's funny, I did an episode on it 2 years ago, and I got an email, be careful, you talk about the Pazers. And I had talked to another podcast.
Did you really get an email?
Yeah, not from them, but somebody said, hey, be careful, because I know of someone who did it. And then sure enough, I talked to another podcast host who did a special on the podcast family, on the Pizer family, and he got the same type of message that There's a reason these people's names are kind of quiet: the Orsinis, the Pazers, and many. Right, the DuPonts and the Disneys. They're relatively new families on the world stage, and they may have even just changed their name from these older families. But some of these families go back 1,000 years, if not longer.
And it is like that. It's just really, really, really strange. You know what? It makes me think when you said that warning, I was reading letters between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson a while back. And John Adams, they talked about the Jesuits in these letters. And he said something to the effect of that the society, I think he called it, and he used the word calamity. I think he said it's been a greater calamity to mankind than the entire French Revolution. So he was comparing the despotism of Napoleon to the danger of the Jesuits. And when you have a statesman, as someone who was as wealthy as he was back then, and you see letters, you see the inside baseball between him and Thomas Jefferson get exposed, and it's exposing none other than the Jesuits, and then I think there's probably something to it.
I had written an article a couple of weeks ago on the hyperinflation that we're witnessing here. I went down to the corner store, and granted, we live in the country, and everything is just a little more out here. But I picked up a loaf of bread, and I paid $4.29, and it just hit me like, my goodness, for a loaf of bread, flour, yeast, and water, $4.30, and it brought me back. And you look at the French Revolution and Weimar, and the spending, and going back to what I said at the very beginning with the debt just screaming past 33 trillion, and we're well into 34 trillion. And all of these events had the same outcome, and it was, financial collapse and upheaval within the country. And with us being into another election cycle, and they love to spin things up, I'm wondering, as we transfer into, I'd like to talk a little bit about American politics and kind of the hypnosis that it has on people. What do you and again, we're not prophets, but what do you expect this year, being an election year and knowing the tricks that they have up their sleeves?
Well, I expect some sort of event, and I won't say a dangerous event. It doesn't have to be that, but some event financially. This financial system, in my opinion, has got to be coming to an end here shortly. The current fiat financial system has to be. We can continue to play with interest rates, but they're making more headway with digital currencies. I'm seeing that, Sam Bankman-Fried got a slap on the wrist compared to what he did. I'm seeing political candidates playing their part. I think that they're bolstering Trump, but I do see an event. There's a lot of upheaval in the world right now, and I think that these families are ready to make a killing off of it. Specifically, when you mentioned the French Revolution, didn't the Rothschilds make a fortune off the French Revolution?
Waterloo. Yeah, they had advanced information on the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo, and they made a fortune.
Yeah, there's usually always a battle, or there's always some type of event, financial event, that kicks these things off. I'm hoping that the event doesn't lead to war. I'm hoping that it's not a violent event, but you can feel it. It's at a fever pitch in the country, and they have gotten people riled up about politics. And this is not on accident. You're seeing what you're seeing because they're giving it to you. They could double down on the mind control on the television that we all watch, but they're giving you a lot of nuggets, and they're trying to tell you that it's a lot of inside baseball when all it is, in my opinion, is what you're being spoon-fed. Like all of the Epstein list that's coming out now. What's happening because of it? Nothing. How many times has Bill Clinton's name been on there? How many times has he been implicated in controversy? I mean, go back to Haiti. Nothing's being done to these people, and it doesn't look like anything is. But I see some sort of event happening to cause a huge financial change.
I agree, and it's a toss-up between a huge credit event or World War III, which Albert Pike prophesized, and I do believe at some time they are going to see his prophecy through. And certainly the ducks are in a row for that to happen. But as I've said many times before, every time you think you figured out the hidden hand, they throw a curveball to you.
Every time. It's because we'll be getting into this in Transmission X. I am of the opinion this isn't the first time that a reset has happened. And there's a lot of interesting information out there that points to previous resets, societal resets and monetary resets, complete empire resets. And so I'll definitely be getting into that. That's a little out there for most people too, but it's very interesting that you're seeing all of these changes, and you can literally go on the World Economic Forum's webpage, and you can honestly look up the documents, look up the plan. They have a plan for 2030. They have written a book called The Great Reset, and they're telling people exactly what happens before it happens. It's literally truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, by the way, I think next week is the annual World Economic Forum conference in Switzerland.
Unbelievable. Switzerland, man, those are such a good people in Switzerland, the average Swiss.
Yeah.
But by them setting themselves up to be neutral, they literally, it was like Oregon taking the ban off of the illegality of drugs.
Right.
They just they allowed the cartel to just go set up shop.
Yep.
Switzerland, by becoming neutral, and continuing to arm their people, because their people are very armed. But by being neutral, they allowed secrecy to fill those gaps, those voids. And if that's not the belly of the beast in a lot of the ways, I don't know what place is, because that is where the rich go to hide their money, and that is where they can go to get away and be protected, because Switzerland is also fortified like no other. For anyone to go take Switzerland would be a heck of a challenge.
For sure. And who guards the Pope?
Oh man,
the Swiss Guard, right?
The Swiss Guard. You're right. And they have for the longest time. Don't they? Wait, is the Swiss Guard? Isn't the Swiss Guard? Don't they guard? Don't they have Swiss soldiers in the Vatican city limits?
Oh, sure. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. You know what? See, thanks. You make connections when you talk to other people telling the truth.
That's right.
I love it. I don't know everything. I read, and I just happen to remember a lot.
Yep, they are a guard unit maintained by the Holy See that protects the Pope and the Apostolic Palace within the territory of the Vatican City State. And it goes back to when? 1506. And what happened at that same time frame? That was all of these events happened right around the Reformation.
Interesting. Man, see, the connections are just interesting, and I think it gives credit to podcasts popping up out of nowhere talking about it, because it's becoming more relevant than it has ever been today. Because people are noticing the coincidences aren't so much coincidences, and they're noticing the similarities between the history that they've been lied about and the current events that are happening today. And it's pretty creepy.
And the other thing that I wanted to mention before I forget if you Google the Bank of International Settlements and click on images, and then click on, type in the Tower of Babel and click on images, they are shockingly look the same.
Let me see this. Let me get my computer out in front of me. Hold on.
The
The
Tower
Bank
of
of International Settlements.
Yep. Look at the
All right,
image.
images. Oh, yep, Basel, Switzerland. Oh, it just happens to be ball. Like, okay.
Yep.
Oh, well, there you go. Unbelievable. If this doesn't, if this doesn't prove the old mystery, the Babylon, the old Bill Cooper message that he was trying to send the whole time, man. See, you look at stuff like this, and it can't be a coincidence. There's no way that that's a coincidence. It's just built exactly like the Tower of Babel was drawn.
And in the Bible, what chapter in Genesis is the Tower of Babel mentioned in? Chapter 11, which is a huge number to them. It's actually between verse 1 and 9. And inverted, you get 9111.
So today being the 11th, the K that I mentioned being the 11th letter.
Yep.
Super interesting. Man.
Oh, yeah, today is 111. That's right.
You know what? So for any of you listeners like me that listened to Bill Cooper back in the day, if you listened to the Fact Hunter, he plays, George, you play all of his Mystery of Babylon, everything is pretty, and it's just fantastic. But do you know, I just recently learned this, do you know that he used to read from Jordan Maxwell's book, and he wasn't reading from it as the truth. He was reading from Jordan Maxwell's books and saying, this is what the deep state thinks.
Yep.
This is what, and I had no idea. And then you look into Jordan Maxwell, just so happens to be friends with Manly P. Hall, who is the honorary 33rd degree Freemason. It's almost like all of these guys in these secret clubs, all of them, they're not all linked. Like, so if you're a Knight of Malta, you may not be in the council of, or the 300 club, the Club of 300, whatever that's called. You may not be in any one of the specific secret clubs, but you most certainly are a Freemason. It's interesting that all of these go back to ancient Egypt, Hiram Abiff, and the Masonic order. It's just, man, it's crazy. And then you made me just look at the Tower of Babel, and now, as a truther, I'm going to have to, when we get off the phone, go look into this big time. I'm going to probably spend all day researching this stuff.
Yeah, I've told our listeners this 1,000 times. They want you to believe that Switzerland is this lovely place where people yodel and make great chocolate, but there's a huge evil within that country. Again, with the monetary system, the international monetary system being based there, with CERN, the World Economic Forum, the World Zionist Organization started there in 1897, which, of course, 20 years later, the Balfour Declaration, and 30 years later, the State of Israel was created. So it's dot to dot to dot to dot.
And yeah, and even from back when I was mentioning the story that I read, them pushing people towards the nation state back then, it's almost like they literally won't leave that area alone and won't give it any peace. Listen, the Palestinians and Israelis are the same. They were the same, part of the same people. Like the people who lived back in Christian times in Judea, they were similar people. They got along. They got along until the priest class pushed division. And it's exactly what's happening in our country today. They will push division from the pulpit to your living room. And it's unfortunate because it's the opposite reason that religion even exists. It exists to promote peace and to have you do good works and to follow certain guidelines so that you can live a nice life, so that you can get closer to God, to your Heavenly Father. And these people do nothing but propagate wars. They do nothing but force division, and it's just once you start learning this, I think that's when, as a researcher, you really have to go back and try to expose these people. I think you have a responsibility to at least have the conversation with people, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, there are a lot of subjects that are uncomfortable to talk about, and you have to be very thoughtful when you deliver that message. However, the more those type of conversations are usually the one. I always say, if you're catching flack, that means you're over the target. So there is something to them, but it's actually the controllers again, right? They're the ones who make these particular subjects touchy because they tell you can't talk about these things. And yeah, it's very interesting. And talking about division, look what happened to the Methodist Church over the last few years. They actually split their denomination in half. Because half of the Methodist Church was worried about conforming to the world, right? The BLM and the transgender agenda. In Chicago, they have a transgender preacher at a church in Chicago. It's a Methodist church. It is sanctioned by the United Methodist Church. So again, you have to be very, very careful. There's, I think William said there was like 30,000 different denominations out there, and that's why personally I believe church attendance is down. And I did want to kind of segue into COVID, but before we do, I have to mention, because you did mention resets, and it's really interesting. I don't know if you looked into, there's a lot of people who believe there was a great reset somewhere between 1850 and 1870, the orphan trains, the World's Fairs, building entire cities and then just tearing them down. Is that something that you have looked into?
It is. It is difficult for me. I've looked into that extensively because it's interesting. I think the dates may be incorrect, but they may not be, because there is massive evidence of what they call a mud flood, all over the world. And when you listen, listeners, if you look into this, or if you haven't, if you don't know what we're talking about, take everything that you read with a grain of salt. There's a lot of this that has been, I think, kind of over dramatized, but there may be little gems of truth in this because of evidence, like I said, of mud floods, of just layers of earth covered with mud, and then ancient civilizations building on top of that layer which covered buildings previously. It's the architecture, when you look into this, is what makes it really interesting. For example, if you go to any downtown, you can notice the stark difference in architecture that supposedly was built in a time when people were rolling around with carts and buggies. Okay, you can look at dates, like how you can look at dates and pictures and find crazy things with your eyes. Like when you look at pictures of San Francisco, old pictures before San Francisco was built, when it was just miners there, and like I said, carts and buggies. And then 50 years later, it's fully grown, fully booming, fully built, massive buildings, dome structures all over the place. That happened in Chicago. It happened in a lot of America's blooming cities back in the day. And what's interesting is the modern day architecture never even comes close. Not even back then. You can see that when they started building, the differences between the fully stone structures with ornate carvings, with it looks like antennas at the top of them. They weren't weather vanes like on barns, I promise you that. But it was interesting. The architecture takes you down a road of investigation that I highly recommend everyone look into. And it could all be for naught, but I do feel like there are some lies being told here. I don't think we were told the complete truth. And if you want to look into interesting topics, look into this topic here.
Yeah, all great points. Have you ever watched John Levi on YouTube?
No,
So I encourage everybody. I want to leave a
I will.
note, so I make sure I put this in the show notes. John Levi, and it's called My Lunch Break, and they both break down this architecture, which again, when they excavate and things like the size of some of these doors for these buildings, and of course, going all the way back to Tesla, which you mentioned earlier in the podcast, with the church steeples and the free energy that was hidden from us because obviously you can't charge people for free energy, and they want to nickel and dime you. That's part of the system of the matrix for you to be a slave to society and work your entire life and turn your children over to the public school system for them to be indoctrinated and to destroy their critical thinking. One of my guests last night made such a profound statement, right? Because when the children are the age between like 8 and 11, 12, 13, that's really when they mold their mind. When you're young, when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, you actually see the world for what it is. And then you are told what to think the world is. And when you think about how profound that is, like you're able to see as a youngster what the world really is and how beautiful nature is. And then you're told, oh, no, that beautiful dandelion is actually a weed. Here's some cancer-causing spray to kill it. And all the other lies that were taught. Really, it floored me to think that, you spend thousands of dollars of property tax money to send your child to a place. And again, I'm not talking about the teachers here. I'm talking about the system that has been in place to where we teach, again, Christopher Columbus, CC, there's your 33, to believe that, he sailed the ocean blue and all of these other stories to make you believe.
By the way, Christopher Columbus was a crypto Jew, a hidden Jew. He was a Marrano, is what they called him. And it's just very interesting once you learn that, because it makes that history change completely.
That there is, most of our history is at best a little bit of truth sprinkled with lies. But again, My Lunch Break and John Levi on YouTube. I will put those links in there as well if you guys want to check out that, like with the resets and the mud floods. And when you really dig down into some of this architecture, what was it before and how old is it really? It's really an interesting subject. I do want to delve into COVID because that is the one topic that I think is the big reason for this, for lack of a better term, Great Awakening. There has been a lot of people wake up over the last 3 years because of what they were told and what they saw. And even I still do believe there's a lot of people out there who choose to take the blue pill because they're comfortable with their life and they don't want the burden of knowing how evil this world really is. But how did it affect your life? And did you know from the get-go it was a psyop? And then we'll get into things like how long do you think they prepared for this? Was this a generational plan and things of that nature? But give me your thoughts on COVID.
I knew from the jump. And the only reason is because I was aware of who Carrie Mullis was previously. For those of you who don't know, Carrie Mullis was the inventor of the PCR test, the test that they were using they were calling it, it's hard for me to explain as a layperson the PCR test, but it's the test that you see on TV when they're in the lab and it goes in circles. They call it cycles. It can test for any type of genetic material and pull genetic material. But the thing is that test, the more cycles that test provides you, the more results you're going to get no matter what you're looking for. So the test cannot tell the difference between genetic material and a virus. And Carrie Mullis was very, very clear about that. And interestingly enough, if you go back and you want to hear something cool, I don't know what program it was on, what show it was on. I use those two words and then I think about my show or my transition. But go back and listen and see if you can find old audio of Carrie Mullis calling out Dr. Fauci. And then as soon as I saw Fauci's face, and I had previously heard the interview, where he challenged him to a debate and said that he was a fraud. And then I found out that we're using the Kary Mullis test, and then all of a sudden, Kary Mullis dies. I found it was too much for my questioning mind, my brain, to think that COVID was anything other than either forced upon us, and that's how they're getting the results they want, or a hoax in general.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that had so many agendas to it, right? It divided families. I've had so many emails and phone calls of people telling the stories about how during like that Thanksgiving of 2020, people not being invited because they wouldn't wear a mask, or the following year, if you weren't vaccinated, you weren't coming to parties, and folks like my wife who lost their jobs because they refused to bow to the altar of big pharma. So many agendas to that.
Unbelievable.
The largest wealth transfer in history. Obviously germs, this virus could find its way around the mom and pop stores. But it was okay for Amazon and Walmart to stay open. It was egregious, and to call your fellow man non-essential and everything, even with the 6, right? 6 feet. Why 6? Why not 5? Why not 7? Why did they choose 6? Just so many evil agendas to the entire thing.
You want to know an interesting book that I recommend to everyone? It's a book I have on my bookshelf here. And if you've never questioned what you've been taught about modern day virology, I think maybe you should just start the questioning process. And you can do so by looking up a book called Immunization, The Reality Behind the Myth. It's by author Waylene James. It is a fantastic read. And no, I don't know him. I'm not plugging this book. I'm just an average Joe. I just read a lot. But if you've never questioned germ theory and terrain theory, if you don't want to look up the book, you can look up those two things and just start the questioning process. And you may prove to yourself germ theory is real. But you may find other opinions that may open your mind up a little bit to what we've been told. And so, yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if you've ever read that book, George, but it's fantastic.
I have not. I've read Eustace Mullins' book, Murder by Injection, and many other books similar to that. I think you did mention that book to me last week when we spoke. And that book, I haven't ordered it yet, but I think it's pretty cool because it talks about everything. It talks about, germ theory versus terrain theory, but he gets into, Watlene, I'm not familiar with that name, whether it's he or she, but gets into the political and the psychological. And then I think they even touch on the AIDS debacle and the truth about that. So it's a lot. I'm going to order it soon. I think it's about $40 on Amazon, which I should say I'm pretty surprised it's even available on Amazon, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was surprised too. I bought it 5 years ago and just was certainly going through it. It was one that I was interested in, but I kind of just shelved it until COVID hit. And I was like, nope, I have to read extensively. And it opens your mind up. And then everyone, I do recommend that you just look into Kary Mullis. Kary Mullis was an interesting guy. He wasn't your average doctor. He had a lot of crazy opinions, but he was also one of those people, when you heard him talk, he just told it like it was. What you see is what you got. And he wasn't a BS artist. And he's a very interesting guy.
We've played the audio of him slamming Dr. Fauci several times, calling him a fraud, and he has no idea what he's doing.
Oh, have you? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great clip. You've seen it, right?
Oh yeah, no, I saw it a long time ago,
Yeah.
and I would think back, because this was before COVID, and I would think back to the whole AIDS, how everything was run, and AIDS just made me question disease in general when I was a kid, because when I was little, you were at risk of getting AIDS. Like, I was scared to go near anyone bleeding. It was a big deal. It was the Magic Johnson thing. It was a story, and it was a story that people didn't know the answers to, and so there was a lot of ignorance around that story. But barely anyone ever looked into old Dr. Fauci when it came to that story. And when you start looking into him and figuring out what drugs that he had tested where and how many people had died, it's interesting. You'll look up Dr. Fauci and what he did in India. Man, what a guy! I tell you, what a character.
Yeah, I think Bill Gates had a large hand. I don't remember which vaccine it was, but he wiped out a lot of people as well.
Oh, Bill Gates in India, Dr. Fauci in Africa.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, those are the two that are very interesting when you start looking at vaccines, because you'll see their names pop up a lot, and then you can look up how they make money off of them. And for the longest time, George, I didn't know that you could patent these type of things. I didn't know you could patent anything biological, and I found out that I was wrong about that. That's also something interesting. It's to look into all the patents around vaccines and viruses themselves. It's just the evil in this world. Everyone just seeking to make a buck. I mean, we all have to support ourselves, but these people go above and beyond what they do for money is just sad. It really is to me, and it's pure evil, because people's lives get lost because of their greed.
By the way, another book I should suggest is Ethel Hume's Beauchamp or Pasteur, A Lost Chapter in Biology. Everybody knows who Louis Pasteur is, and the pasteurization of milk, which is named after him, but few people know about Beauchamp. And just like everything else, you could put Beauchamp and Tesla. You can put Beauchamp and Tesla in the same category. Ethel Hume's Beauchamp or Pasteur, A Lost Chapter in Biology.
Nice. I'm going to put that down right now. See, I love this. We get to talk to like-minded people. You get access to new information.
100%.
I'll get this book and start reading probably within the next week.
100%. There's so many great books out there, and I always try to let people know, if you can afford it, try to, and you can go to Goodreads, there's eBay, hundreds of websites out there where you can try to find the cheapest price, because I do believe Fahrenheit 451 is going to be in something we'll see in our lifetime.
I mean, listen, Orwell could come back from his grave right now and just put a 1984 T-shirt on, and he could tell you how he was right.
Yeah,
he obviously he obviously knew some inside baseball, because I mean it's about as dystopian as he said it would be. And I just hope that we can correct the ship. I hope that people pick up enough to start making little changes, because I'm from the servant class of America. I lower middle income my whole life, but still, if you don't have a lot of resources to make change, you can still make changes. You can grow your own food. You can at least attempt to. You can make your own bread. You can bake your own products. You can do things to where you can become a little more self-sufficient, and it really doesn't cost that much money. So I hope that people can learn to create their own little bits of a supply chain, even no matter what it is. I hope they can be a little more self-sufficient. And I think that the more people become aware of what's actually going on, the more the person above them in society will become aware that they're aware. And it may light a little fire under them to get moving and do something that they can do, because everyone can affect a little bit of change. And if everyone does just what they can do, I think it will go up the chain. And I think the people that can really affect change financially will find a movement behind them, the likes of which that we've never seen. I think we're seeing it in the people, everyone getting behind Trump. I think that it may be a little, that fervor may be a little misplaced because of his connections. It's like, when I look back at my journey, a lot of it has to do with Alex Jones. I saw a movie called Waking Life, and he was a character, and he literally opened my mind up to a lot of these things that I think are very important. the banking system, a lot of the conspiracies. But with his CIA connections, he could be a good guy. He could be everything he says he is, but it's very likely that that's not the case. And I don't know, I never met him. I don't know. But when people have CIA connections and when you have Zionist connections like Trump has, and I think personally, you have to look into everybody who has power, because even if you like their message, you have to understand who their friends are. And so that's my big message. I think there's a ton of hope, and I think that we can do it as a people, but I think we're going to have to do it as a people instead of depending upon a Savior other than Jesus, other than getting behind Jesus and doing what Bill Cooper said and read those red words in the Bible. But as far as a person just coming to save everyone, I think that we the people need to save ourselves.
100%. And I mention often that I do believe that the people of the MAGA movement are good people. Many are Christians, and they do want to make a difference. But like you said, they're putting their hopes into, I'm going to vote once every 4 years, and that's how I make a difference. That's not how you make a difference. And the fact that the biggest problem with Trump was, besides the January 6th setup, was there's a guy named Wilbur Ross, and he was a Rothschild agent. He worked with the Rothschilds his entire life. He was a Democrat since 1957.
Of course.
Democrat since 1957. He woke up on January 2017, became a Republican, and was appointed the Secretary of Commerce by Donald Trump.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The more you know.
The more you know. But yeah, it's and it all goes back to the world stage. They're going to give you good guys, and there's going to be the bad guys, and people are so wrapped up with Trump, Hunter Biden, and all this worldly stuff that you just have to look past and understand that. Look how much debt Trump brought to our country, and he was Operation Warp Speed. And what happens if you take the P out of Warp Speed? You get War Seed, right? A war on the seeds, which is something that goes back once again to the flood, right? Because of the manipulation of the DNA that was going on back then. So you have to start local, find like-minded people and things like that. Just because the federal government is too far gone, and January 6th was the nail in the coffin. Nobody will ever go back to D.C. to protest again because they are scared to death they'll be thrown in jail.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But why go back to D.C.? It's not even the real nation's capital. I think the next time that we should go to D.C. is when we go to make our arrests. That's the next time I think we should go to D.C. I think a lot of those cronies are just completely complicit. I think that they're guilty of crimes against this entire nation, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that it's my hope that they see their day in court. That's my hope, because we the people can do a lot more, and I think it starts by just opening your mind a bit, learning, questioning things. And I guess that's the reason why really me and you are here, is because we feel like that it's important to question things, to talk about alternative news, to talk about alternative history, because there's truths out there that are being kept from you. And I think it's important that that's the first step. Just start questioning things, and then do that for yourself, and then do that for your neighbors as well. Once you learn something, you don't have to be dogmatic in your approach, but you can at least start having conversations. And I think the more conversations that we have, the more discourse, the better. But I love the fact that you had me on here, and I think I maybe have 50 downloads, and you had me on the podcast here, and I'm no one big, but we talked and we agreed on some things, and you gave me a platform to have this conversation today, and I really do appreciate it, George.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been a wonderful conversation, and we look to have you again in the near future, and we'll kind of talk about the subjects that you've been chatting about if you'd come back. And I would once again give you the last last word to tell the audience again where they can find your podcast and any other information you'd like to share with the audience before we close.
Sure. I say this in my podcast all the time, but I think it's very important. If you want to find me, go to or you can send me a message, transmissionx@mail.com. Like George says, not Gmail, mail.com. If you want to text me, listen, you can text me. If you have an idea, I know I'm opening up Pandora's box here, but you can. I want to start a conversation, and I want to interact with my audience. So if you have anything that you want me to touch on, I will do my best to get back to you. If you have any stories, if you're an insider, please text me. It's 606-215-2999. And do your best to do your own research. Never believe anything we say. Look up everything, but most importantly, be ready.
Well said. And again, we'll have all the links, his email, phone number, if you'd like to text Nate. All that will be in the show notes. So really, you hit a home run. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'd love to have you back down the road. It'll be interesting to see where we are in the world at that time. I do think in April, that's when and again, I'm not a prophet or anything like that, but just with the history, that April 19th date is a very interesting date. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep our head on a swivel. Let's be mentally and spiritually fit, and we'll see where this all goes. So again, for Nate, I'm George. Everybody have a great weekend. God bless you all. Keep your head on a swivel. And until we meet again, we will see you.
Again, thank you so much, George. That was a hell of a conversation, buddy. And for my listeners, stay tuned to the next transmission as we continue to follow the trail all the way back to the Scarlet Council and the Brotherhood of the Snake. Like George says, keep your head on a swivel. And like I always tell you, be ready.